My name is Tom Harrington. It wasn't always Tom Harrington, but a name I had only acquired late in life. I used to know myself as Jason Wilkins, and in some sense that's still how I refer to myself, but only in private, so as not to confuse anyone. It's a way to keep the memory of my former identity alive. Sometimes I go to the bathroom, lock the door, look in the mirror and say, "Hello Jason, how have you been?" I remember my mom calling me Jason. I remember my friends calling me Jason. I don't ever recall being called Tom. No one ever knew me as Tom. The more time passes, the more I doubt reality, or more appropriately, my own history. It happened in 1984. My wife Mary had finally convinced me to go to church. It was in late August, and that Sunday the heat was unforgiving. The congregation was too poor to buy an air conditioner, and the few windows they had were nailed shut to thwart any more vandalism, routine hatred aimed at the controversial pastor Mel C. Dellinger, a man who believed that we were all destined to escape hell and be admitted into paradise. Heaven was a different place open only to the chosen. Hell would be destroyed. I didn't care one way or the other, though I admit I liked the idea of there being no hell. I was miserable, my palms sweaty and my suit far too small. I hadn't worn it since my interview 5 years earlier, and let's just say I wasn't as small as I used to be. The church was a small building with 10 pews, 5 on each side, loaded to the brim with people crammed shoulder to shoulder. It was a close congregation in more ways than one. Pastor Mel was in a real hot mood that morning, screaming and dancing, raving about the power of the Holy Spirit. The heat and the agitation of the sermon irritated me beyond comprehension. I don't know why I was in such a mood, but I wanted to stand up, pull off my coat and shirt and bust out the door. I imagined that on the other side of the door was a nice cool breeze, and the tranquil chorus of nature quietly inviting me home. Pastor Mel bellowed ever more fervently the longer his sermon progressed. He was not at all tiring, indicating that he was ready to preach all day. I was growing impatient. I grew up in a church that lasted an hour at the most. There were times when my wife would leave the house and didn't get home until 3 or 4 hours later. I didn't think I could stand it much longer. Mary would be mad, but I was about to get up and leave, and then it happened. Pastor Mel burst into flames. It wasn't a slow fire working from one end of his body to the other end. It was an all-consuming flame. Pastor Mel began screaming for help and running around. A man from the second pew ran to the altar, grabbed the scarlet cloth, knocking the chalice to the floor. He slung it over Pastor Mel and threw him to the ground. The altar cloth immediately caught fire and incinerated into oblivion. The pianist had grabbed the chalice and ran to the bathroom. She tossed the water at Pastor Mel as he lay writhing on the floor. The water evaporated into a pitiful wisp of steam. "A bucket! Do we have a bucket?" I heard someone yell. I pushed past my wife, took my coat off, and tried again to smother the fire. But before I could get to him, Pastor Mel got up and ran out the door. He dropped to the ground and started rolling across the lawn, but to no avail. In fact, wherever he rolled, the grass there caught fire. The congregation followed him outside. A man had found the garden hose and hooked it up to the faucet. He turned the valve and began walking towards the pastor. He could only get so close before the hose snapped tight and yanked him to the ground. He got up and pointed the nozzle in the air. The water flowed upward in an arch. It barely reached the pastor, and the few drops that fell over him fizzled out before ever hitting his body. "Pull the pastor closer," someone suggested. "I called 911, said the pianist. "Jason, do something," Mary pleaded, her eyes teary and red. I ran towards the pastor. He had stopped rolling but was still very much on fire. The skin from his face was melting from his skull. His shirt and clothes burned from his body. His skin charred and blistered, boiling liquid flesh. His chest had collapsed, the sternum severed from his ribs. The smell of a burning human is beyond description. Police cars and fire trucks arrived on the scene, sirens playing a funeral dirge for the poor old pastor who believed everyone got to go to paradise. As one of the firemen unraveled the hose, he too burst into flames. In fact, all of them burst into flames, including the congregation, including my wife. Their screams were in unison, their pain instantaneous and shared. Points of fire were scurrying about the lawn, rolling and bumping into one another. 3 of the congregants were uselessly fighting for the hose. The water extinguished as soon as it touched the unholy fire. My wife was lying on her back perfectly still, not at all fighting for her life. I ran towards her and tossed my jacket over her face and chest. The jacket burned away in an instant. I looked around for something else. The hose was now available. The 3 men crumbled to the ground, unable to move, melted to the lawn. I ran and grabbed the hose. Mary was close enough for me to drench her if fate had only been a little kinder. I hit her with the full force of the water, but it never touched her body. There was a shield of heat around her. I wailed and trembled. My only hope was that she had already died. A part of me believed that. I hoped that she had suffered a heart attack and avoided the worst of the suffering. Maybe that was why she laid there without a fight. Maybe it was a quick and painless death. I couldn't stay and watch my wife's body be destroyed in so heartless a manner. I stumbled away from the church disoriented. Everywhere I looked were dead bodies, burning away to ash. The entire town was engulfed and the smell of burnt flesh was thick in the air. A few survivors were still scurrying about, but sooner or later the everlasting fire would destroy them too. Fear consumed me. Why was I not yet on fire? The thought of being burned alive was terrifying. I had always thought that the worst way to die was by fire. I considered suicide, dying by my own choice and by my own means, one especially less painful than what I had witnessed. A pawn store, I could find a gun there. And yet I didn't do it. I went home, ran some cold water, and fell asleep in the tub. Night fell. I had fallen asleep, but the sound of a yelping dog woke me up. I dare not get out of the tub, but I needed to run more cold water. I had come to believe that I had avoided the fire by immersing myself in cold water. I stayed there for 2 days, freezing my ass off and drinking bath water, but convinced that this was the only way. That second night I heard a man talking outside. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, a condition brought on by my extreme hunger, but no, it was clearly my neighbor Dave. I got out of the tub, got dressed, and hurried outside. Dave was walking aimlessly in my yard. "Dave!" I yelled as I approached him. He looked up at me in confusion. "Dave, you didn't catch fire? What in the hell are you talking about? You haven't seen anything. The fire, all the people dead." He looked around trying to ascertain what I was rambling on about. "Dave. Why do you keep calling me Dave?" He patted his chest with both hands. "Chris, my name is Chris." I stumbled backwards, not knowing how to respond. "Dave, I know his name is Dave. My kids played baseball with him. His wife's name is Pam. They've been married for 20 years. He wasn't joking. He was legitimately confused. He truly believed his name was Chris. I made my way back through town. The town was empty, cleared of any dead bodies, burnt or otherwise. It was dark, but for the orange streetlights and the lights streaming from the church windows. I ran through the church lawn up to the front door. I heard singing from inside. I turned the knob and pushed open the door. The pews were crowded with people. There was a pastor in front, but it wasn't Pastor Mel. He was in the pews, sitting next to my wife. I rushed to her, bent down and hugged her, relieved to see her alive. The singing abruptly stopped. "Tom, what are you doing?" she protested. "What do you mean, Tom? It's me, Jason." "Mary," said Pastor Mel, looking confused. "Pastor, I'm glad you're okay. I must have had a nightmare." "Pastor, Tom, are you all right?" Karen imagined that, me a pastor. They both laughed. My heart pounded. I was confused and angry. The joke had played out and I wasn't amused. I grabbed Pastor Mel by the arm and pulled him out of the pew. "That's my wife, Pastor." I plopped down beside Mary, but she scooted away as if I had leprosy. Pastor Mel punched me in the nose. My eyes watered. I couldn't see, but I could feel several men pulling at me. They dragged me out into the aisle and started kicking at me. "Hold on, boys, leave him be. He's in a bad way. He needs the Lord. He needs prayer and understanding. Tom has made a lot of mistakes in life, but he isn't beyond redemption." I looked up to see the pianist walking towards me. She knelt down beside me. "We all need a new beginning, a fresh start to be reborn," she announced to the congregation. She then turned and peered into my eyes. She spoke softly so only I could hear and said, "Don't we, Jason? Don't we all need to be reborn?" She winked at me and made her way back to the piano, banging out Amazing Grace as the congregation sang and rejoiced for the love that had caused them to be born again.